As heavily as the US and Israel have battered Iran, the country's regime is still capable of spreading terror. Drones in their hundreds are being launched at bases across the Middle East as we speak. But an unexpected player has just entered the game. Ukraine is here to end Iran's terror, and it's teamed up with the US and Middle Eastern nations to do it. First Russia, now Iran. Ukraine has unleashed a futuristic weapon that will end the Iranian regime's drone scourge. What is that weapon? Interceptor drones. Ukraine has listened to calls from the US and Middle Eastern countries being affected by Iranian retaliation to Operation Epic Fury, and it's stepped up. Ukrainian interceptor drones are being sent to the Gulf region, and they're being used to stop the Shaheds that Iran is launching at its many enemies. Who's getting these drones? American bases in the Middle East, in Jordan, and maybe we will send also to Saudi Arabia, Zelensky has declared when discussing Ukraine's new agreement with the US. This is huge for Ukraine, and it could have a massive impact on the country as it continues its fight against Putin's brutal invasion of its territory. We'll explain why later in the video, as we first need to cover why Ukraine is sending these drones and how much of an impact they will have on Operation Epic Fury. Why is a simple question to answer, the US asked. During the opening hours of the operation, 6 US military personnel were killed. The weapon that killed them was likely a Shahed-type drone, Euronews reports, and the incident raised immediate alarm bells in the US command. These cheap drones don't compare to what the US brings to the table in terms of modernity or strength, but that's the problem. Shaheds are cheap, can be launched in huge numbers, and it only takes 1 or 2 to break through air defenses to cause a lot of damage. Every Shahed swarm that is launched forces the US to expend its far more expensive interceptor missiles to stop them, and the approach doesn't always work. Zelensky himself has pointed that out, noting that the US burned through 800 of its Patriot missiles in the first 3 days of Operation Epic Fury, which is a cost that the US simply can't and shouldn't absorb if it's going to be in an extended fight with Iran. So the request came through, as Zelensky explains. We received a request from the United States for specific support in protection against Shaheds in the Middle East region, Ukraine's president announced on March 5th in a post published on X. He added, "I gave instructions to provide the necessary means and ensure the presence of Ukrainian specialists who can guarantee the required security," he added, before offering a pointed reminder that Ukraine stands ready to help ensure the security of the partners that have helped it to defend itself against the Russian invasion of its territory. There's a reason for the last part of the message. Ukraine knows that its interceptor drones offer leverage, which is a topic we'll dig into soon, and there's more. Ukraine isn't only sending over interceptor drones to the US bases in the Middle East. The country knows all too well that expertise has to accompany the weapon, or it won't be as effective as the US and its allies need it to be. Along with the drones, Ukraine is sending experts to the Middle East to teach the US and its partners how to get the most out of their new interceptors. Again, Zelensky took to X to explain, stating on March 17th, "Right now there are 201 Ukrainians in the Middle East and the Gulf region, and another 34 are ready to deploy. Those experts are already in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates," Zelensky adds, and there are deals being formulated with other countries, in addition to the drone deal Zelensky says that Ukraine has with the US. Ukraine's expertise is in high demand right now. Anybody who's been paying attention to the Ukraine war will be able to tell you why. The drones that Iran is launching at US bases are the very same types of Shahed drones that it's been supplying to Russia almost since the beginning of the Ukraine war. Iran started delivering these drones shortly after Putin launched his invasion, Le Monde points out. And it wasn't long before the country signed a lucrative licensing deal with Putin that allowed Russia to build Shahed-type drones on its own territory, with support from the Iranian regime. This is important in the context of what's happening in the Middle East right now, because it means that Ukraine has been dealing with Shahed drones for 4 years. It knows these drones inside out, which means it understands the tactics used when the drone swarms are unleashed, and it has developed tactics along with weapons to minimize the damage that these swarms can cause. That's the expertise that the US and its Middle Eastern allies want. They're trying to get to grips with the type of fighting that Ukraine has both innovated and defended itself against for years, and Ukraine is in the perfect position to provide the knowledge they need to accelerate their ability to stop Iran's Shahed drones in their tracks. Of course, knowledge is all well and good, but Ukraine has to deliver the weapons to back the knowledge up, and it has the perfect solution in its cheap interceptor drones. Ukraine has already developed several models of interceptors which have proven themselves very effective against Shaheds, as we'll reveal in a moment. But chief among these interceptor drones, and the most likely to make its way into the Middle East, is the Sting. Described by the New Voice of Ukraine as an FPV interceptor, Sting already boasts a hit rate of between 80 and 90% when unleashed against Russia's Shahed-type drones. Ukraine started using this drone in 2025, and its specs reveal why it's a good counter to Iran's Shaheds. A Sting can fly at speeds of up to 315 kilometers or 195.7 miles per hour, meaning it's fast enough to adjust its position in mid-flight to intercept Shaheds that are pre-programmed to hit specific targets. Sting is a short-range solution as highlighted by its 37-kilometer or almost 23-mile range and its 7-kilometer or 4.3-mile maximum altitude. And best of all, it carries a payload that weighs 500 grams or a little over 1 pound, which plays into the low cost involved in producing the intercept. A Sting doesn't need a bigger payload. It's a small amount of explosive combined with the kinetic energy generated by a collision and the explosive packed into the incoming Shahed to take the Iranian drones out of the sky. We mentioned low cost a moment ago. That, more than anything else, is why the US and its Middle Eastern allies are clamoring to get their hands on Ukraine's interceptors. And to explain why, here's a little scenario. Iran launches yet more of its Shahed drones at an American base. Each of these drones costs Iran somewhere in the region of $20,000 to $50,000 to produce, which is a pittance in the context of traditional military spending. The US has to respond, and it does so by firing Patriot missiles to intercept the drones. Each of these missiles costs the US about $4 million to build. Let's say there are 5 of Iran's drones in the swarm, which is a relatively small number. The cost to Iran is no more than $250,000. The cost to the US, a staggering $20 million. Even if none of Iran's drones hit their targets, it forces the US to blow 80 times the amount of money it costs Iran to send the Shaheds their way. That is an attritional tactic, and it's one that Iran can lean on to put pressure on the US. There are only so many Patriot missiles in the US stockpiles, and if Zelensky is correct, the US had already launched 800 of those missiles during the first 3 days of Operation Epic Fury, and America has already spent $3.2 billion on interceptor missiles plus whatever it spent during the rest of its conflict with Iran. This isn't sustainable, even for the richest military in the world. The Sting interceptor solves all of these problems. The New Voice of Ukraine puts the cost of building Ukraine's drone interceptor at a measly $1,000. Reuters has it slightly higher, quoting a figure of around $2,000, which may be the Sting's export price. But either way, this one futuristic and ingeniously designed drone transforms one of the biggest cost burdens that the US faces in Operation Epic Fury into a distinct advantage. Now it's not Iran that's getting the better return on investment when it unleashes its drone swarms. In our scenario, the US cost of interception drops from $20 million to around $5,000 to $10,000, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars less than it costs Iran to launch the 5 drones we posited. That is a turnaround for the ages. And it transforms what could have been a winning strategy for Iran into an attritional nightmare, the likes of which it was trying to inflict on the US. The only hope that Iran has is that Ukraine's interceptor drones aren't as effective as the US needs them to be. But that hope has already been dashed, and we'll explain why in a moment. Before we do, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. This is the kind of insight that you crave. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We break it down like this every single week. On the control front, Iran can't do much about Sting or other interceptor drones. Sting is piloted using VR goggles that allow an operator to identify and track targets in real time. The interceptor also has an AI-based guidance system which allows it to stick with an incoming Shahed, which it destroys via impact, and a remote detonation mechanism that allows it to unleash its tiny warhead at the perfect time. And this isn't a theoretical technology that Ukraine is providing to the US, it's been proven in battle, and the hit rate of between 80 and 90% shows why. According to United 24 Media, Ukraine's interceptor drones now account for 30% of all the country's air defense kills, as of February 24th. That number is only going to grow higher as Ukraine builds more of these types of low-cost drones. Iran can't even hope that the stockpiles that Ukraine can send to the Middle East will run out. In 2025 alone, Ukraine built 100,000 of its interceptor drones, its National Security and Defense Council revealed. Bear in mind that Ukraine didn't start using its interceptors in high volume until the end of 2025. Now Ukraine claims its production capacity for interceptor drones has grown 8-fold, meaning it can produce 800,000 of its interceptor drones annually, as long as it has the funding. If the US and its allies are paying for interceptors, they're going to get as many as they will ever need to fend off Iran's Shahed attacks. Iran's entire drone-based strategy is shattered in an instant. With Ukraine's interceptor drones arriving along with experts to show the US and its Middle Eastern allies exactly how to use them, Iran is watching in real time as its strategy for forcing the US to burn through millions of dollars has gone up in smoke. Literally in the case of the Shaheds that will now be exploding in mid-air rather than on critical military targets in the Gulf region. But hold on for a moment, you may be wondering why the US would even need interceptor drones at all. You've heard about the percentages being thrown around. It looks like Iran's drone launches have fallen off a cliff since the early days of the operation. That is indeed the case, at least if US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has the correct figures. Hegseth claims that Iran's drone launches have dropped by 95% compared to the opening salvo it unleashed in the early days. The combined US and Israeli attack against Iran's military and drone launching infrastructure has contributed to that. However, 95% doesn't translate to stopped entirely. Iran is still launching drones, even though the swarms are starting to look more like trickles. We saw that on March 19th when Saudi Arabia reported that its air defense systems had intercepted and destroyed a quintet of Iranian drones that were heading toward the eastern parts of the nation, along with its capital city of Riyadh. These 5 drones add to the 13 missiles and drones that Saudi Arabia have managed to intercept, and it shows us that Iran is still very much trying to use its drones to wreak havoc, even if its rate of fire has been drastically reduced. And again, think back to what we said about the cost. Sure, this attack was just 5 drones, but intercepting 5 drones can cost millions of dollars for traditional air defense systems. Why would Saudi Arabia want to spend that much when it can take out the Shaheds using interceptors that cost a tiny fraction of the amount that it would otherwise spend? It just doesn't make sound financial sense, no matter how much of Iran's drone infrastructure has been destroyed. While Shaheds still fly, Ukraine's interceptors have value. And that value brings us right back to the leverage that we mentioned a few minutes ago. We also mentioned the very clear point that Zelensky made about supporting Ukraine's allies, which he backed up on March 17th when he revealed that Ukraine's drone experts were heading to the Middle East. And we are ready to offer similar deals to all our reliable partners, from practical cooperation on drones to future defense alliances. And I don't think anyone would want to leave Ukraine's war-proven strength and capability outside their security. If someone does, it wouldn't be wise, Zelensky declared. Translation: Ukraine sees an opportunity to prove itself useful to the very nations that could provide more support in its fight against Russia. Ukraine is trying to make the most of this opportunity. According to a March 18th Business Insider report, Ukraine has already told the US and its Middle Eastern partners that it can supply up to 1,000 interceptor drones per day to help them defend against Iran's Shaheds. If additional investment is provided, Ukraine says it could provide even more. What this means is that Ukraine could turn its interceptor drones into a reliable source of income that it can then spend on developing or producing more weapons that it can use against Russia. Taking Sting as an example, if we assume the $1,000 figure quoted earlier is Ukraine's cost of production and $2,000 figure quoted by Reuters is the export price, 1,000 drones per day adds up to $2 million. If Ukraine can sign agreements to provide this many drones alone, disregarding the potential for ramping up, that's $730 million per year it could make from its cheap and effective interceptors. Ukraine could also go another route. On March 15th, Reuters reported that Zelensky has made it very clear that Ukraine isn't getting directly involved in Operation Epic Fury. For us today, both the technology and the funding are important, Zelensky declared. We've covered the funding, but what Zelensky is also hinting at is that he's willing to trade Ukrainian drones and expertise for more of the kinds of high-tech Western weapons that it's been using in its war with Russia. More air defense missiles to defend against Russia's ballistic missile strikes wouldn't go amiss for Ukraine. Essentially, anything that Ukraine can't produce itself but needs in its fight could be traded for interceptors and other types of drones. This is leverage for Ukraine. It's proof that a country that has proven the effectiveness of a strong unmanned systems strategy during the 4 brutal years of fighting against Russia, it's now at the point where it can start building on its expertise to solidify the long-term success of itself and its defense industry. There are 2 more angles for Ukraine here, one involving countries in the Middle East and another involving the US. The New York Times explains the latter in a March 9th piece where it points out that providing its interceptor drones to the US allows Ukraine to score some much-needed points with the Trump administration as it continues to try to broker peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. This is Ukraine basically telling the US, look, you can rely on us in your moment of need. That has to count for something when stacking Ukraine up against a country that is vehemently against the US and everything that the West stands for, despite what Putin claims. There are also other reports that Russia has provided intelligence and drone technology to Iran during Operation Epic Fury, which Ukraine could use to deliver another blow to Putin's goals of manipulating the US into supporting Russia and its maximalist demands. The message is simple: Ukraine helps the US, Russia tries to hurt it. Ukraine will be hoping that this message doesn't fall on deaf ears. As for the Middle East, Ukraine is doing a very good job of positioning itself as a vital partner to nations that might not have otherwise had defense-related dealings with Ukraine, were it not for Operation Epic Fury. The Arab Weekly says that Ukraine is positioning itself not just to sell weapons to Gulf nations, but to create dependencies that it can leverage into support from new partners that Putin never saw coming. These partnerships were already developing before the Iran conflict. Saudi Arabia delivered $400 million in aid to Ukraine back in 2023, and Qatar has been involved in the reuniting of over 100 Ukrainian and Russian children with their families during the war, as it served as something of a low-level mediator. But now Ukraine can use the same arguments with nations like these that it can use with the US. Ukraine has the weapons and is willing to help. Russia is providing intelligence and drones to Iran. which Iran is using to strike your territory. Which of these two sounds like the better partner? Oh, and by the way, here are more than 200 drone experts that Ukraine is sending to the Gulf states, even as it defends itself against Russia. Ukraine is making sacrifices to help, and that sort of thing will go a long way with Middle Eastern nations that are feeling that they've been dragged into a conflict that they didn't start. For Iran, the news of Ukraine teaming up with the US and allies in the Middle East couldn't come at a worse time. Drones were Iran's trump card. Now they're being eradicated by interceptors that are cheap, combat-proven, and capable of being delivered in massive numbers. And it gets worse for Iran. Interceptors aren't the only futuristic technology that is stopping Shaheds in their tracks. The US has lasers, and you can find out all about them if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for coverage of the latest Operation Epic Fury developments. And thank you for watching.